How's it going, Diablo fans? So I'm super excited to bring you my Immortal Frozen Orb build now, and it really works. I was saying it works, and I tested it, and it works. I just literally cleared the tier 100 with like 7 minutes left on the timer. You can see the boss kill and the footage right now, and after that we're gonna look at some dungeon footage as well. So I guess this build will push you like somewhere around tier 110 with optimal gear, and I will definitely keep pushing with this and see how far we can go with this. I don't think I have to say too much about how this build works, since this is an Immortal Frozen Orb build. What are we gonna do? Well, we're gonna abuse Ice Blades, cooldown reduction as much as possible, then we're gonna stack a crazy amount of Flameshield duration and cooldown reduction, and that together will basically make our Flameshield last for more than 5 seconds, and the Ice Blades are going to reduce the Flameshield cooldowns down to pretty much slightly below 5 seconds. So what happens is, we can basically face take any boss, will be immortal for the entire duration of the boss fight, and we just have to smash our buttons and wait for the boss to die. Just one side note I want to make here, so this is an end game build. If you are still building and you don't have your tempering, you don't have a lot of resources, go to one of my other builds, use the Blizzard build or use the Frozen Orbs build before, because this build is going to require certain breakpoints you have to reach, and you will find those at the section breakpoints of this video. If you cannot reach those breakpoints, this build is gonna fail. So just be aware, this is really for super late game, like tier 100 Pit on Sorc is pretty late. I know there's like tier 104s already cleared, but still, this is a super late game build. So you gotta keep that in mind when you're making this build, and it's not going to work. That is because you did not reach those certain breakpoints. As always, you can find links to the specific sections of this guide, as well as to my website and all my other build guides in the description down below. Also, you will find the planner of this build there. And at the end of this video, I'm gonna leave you the tier 100 footage. I will also leave you footage of me farming tier 80s with this build, so you can see how it's going in a farming scenario. And I'm also gonna leave you Uber Lilith and Tormented Duriel there. And that's pretty much already it about this build. So without further ado, let's go into the build guide, and let's start as always with the skill tree. Alright, let's go to the tier 100 skill. Just as a quick side note, so this is still not 100% final. I'm going to be evolving this when pushing. So there might be enchantments changing, there might be skills changing slightly, there might be a little change in the Paragon board, but just stick to the planner in this case. So this video might be a tiny bit updated at the time where you're watching this, so always take the latest planner. I'm gonna keep upgrading this, okay? So we just pick Firebolt for the Firebolt enchantment, and then we max out Frozen Orb into Destructive Frozen Orb. This just gives us extra mana regeneration. We could also remove this point probably, but I still like to keep it like this. We don't need the vulnerable. Lightning Spears are gonna fix that for us anyway. And then we put 1 into Devastation and 3 into Elemental Dominance for the extra damage. Then we max out Flameshield completely. This is an Immortal build, so we really want to have the maximum Flameshield duration here. We don't pick any other defensive skills. At this point, I even removed Ice Armor because I don't want to cast it in combat anymore, because it keeps my Elemental Attunement from hitting Flameshield. So in a boss fight, it is stressful if your Flameshield really comes up like 0.2 seconds before you have to cast the next one. So Elemental Attunement takes a lot of the stress out of the boss fights, right? But whenever you're casting Ice Armor, your Elemental Attunement will basically proc on it. Whenever you're casting Teleport, your Elemental Attunement can proc on it. So that's why I'm not playing Ice Armor at this point anymore. And when fighting, you also don't want to excessively use Teleport. You really want to try to have your Elemental Attunement hit your Flameshield as much as possible, okay? So then we put 3 into Glass Cannon, nothing special here. Then at this point, I'm still putting Hydra into Summoned Hydra. This is probably not required since Flameshield does the burn as well, but again, I'm still working a little bit on this tree at this point, right? Then we go for Precision Magic to give us a little bit more lucky hit. I know there's a lot of people saying the lucky hit doesn't matter, so it slightly does matter actually, because the Ice Blades, for example, they fire quite a bit of Frozen Orb and they have a good lucky hit chance. The Hydras tend to fire some Frozen Orbs, the Lightning Spears really don't. So by having more lucky hit, you're really getting a little bit more Frozen Orbs out of the Ice Blades. That's pretty much what it comes down to. And then we go for the very minimal here, right? Align the elements and 1 point into protection. So we really just want to have the barrier up for synergy. It's not for defensive purposes at all. And then we max out Conjuration Mastery. Obviously, the other 3 are coming from the Winterglass. And then 1 into Inner Flame, 3 into Devouring Blaze. This gives us some extra critical strike damage on fire. And then I'm right now playing all the cold passives here for the damage. And I'm right now playing Frigid Breeze because I'm still not 100% fixed on mana. This might also change in a later iteration, but right now I'm still playing it. And then we have Unstable Currents and Prime Unstable Currents just for the extra attack speed. And then we choose Verse Mastery. So Verse Mastery is bugged. It gives you 15% extra damage to close. So, or 20%, whatever. I don't know if it's 15 or 20, and actually if the crit part also works. But, you know, this gives you extra damage to close, which is nice. And there's a different version of this build which you can play with Asus Ferocity and Aspect of Ancient Flame. You're gonna have 2 more attack speed frames, but you're gonna lose out on like 45% damage from Verse Master and the Aspect. So it's kind of a trade-off. I know you get a little more conjurations, but I'm still working on this. I'm still seeing how high this can push though. Right now I'm playing this variant and I cleared tier 100 with this with like 7 minutes left on the timer, so it was really not an issue at all. So I'm pretty confident that this build is a good variant at least. It might not be the perfect one, but at least I like it this way. So for the skills, I just want to talk a little bit about the usage of the skills here, right? So Ice Blades. You want to spam Ice Blades. No matter what, when it's up, just cast it. This is like the tiny, tiny bit of cooldown reduction you need to get the Flameshield going. If you like let down on the Ice Blades and stop casting them, you're gonna die. So really spam your Ice Blades. In the boss fight, you're gonna stand in front of the boss for like 3 or 4 minutes and you're gonna be on the edge of dying, so keep spamming these, okay? And teleport, so you don't want to overuse teleport in a boss fight, really. If the boss is staggered, it's fine if you are teleporting. If you have Flame Shield up, it's fine teleporting. If you just got your Flame Shield back by Elemental Attunement, it's fine teleporting. But you don't want to teleport while you're waiting for a Flame Shield, which is on cooldown, and while you're waiting for an Elemental Attunement proc. So really try to use teleport as least as possible during the boss fights. It's gonna make your life so much easier. And then obviously the heart of this build, Flame Shield. So the breakpoint here is you want to aim for like 5 seconds Flame Shield duration and 4.5 45% cooldown reduction. That is like the breakpoint where you get into the infinite range. If you're just at like 4.8 seconds or something like that, you can definitely play it, but you will not be 100% infinite Flame Shield. And then Unstable Currents, you want to Unstable Currents, or every time when it's up, it gives you 25 extra attack speed, which is important for reaching another attack speed breakpoint. And then Frozen Orb, obviously, we use Frozen Orb to shoot stuff, right? And I'm playing Hydra right now. So again, I said I removed Ice Armor because I keep casting it, and it's gonna eat up my Elemental Attunement procs. So by changing to Hydra, I'm basically just getting 2 extra stacks of Conjuration Mastery. So the way that it works with conjurations is there seems to be 2 limits for conjuration. One limit is your self-cast limit, and the other limit is whatever else is casting the conjurations. So if you have Hydra on your bar, you can put 2 Hydras, and the Winterglass is going to cast another 2. And it works exactly the same with Ice Blades, right? So if you have Ice Blades on your bar, you can cast 3. And the Winterglass or the Ice Blades enchant is going to cast another 3. I don't think you can get above 6. You might be able to get to 9, but I'm pretty sure you can only get 6 Ice Blades up at a time. But those are different instances. So this one is your self-cast Ice Blade, right? You can have 3. If you cast the Force self-cast Ice Blade, it's going to despawn. And then this is the Enchantment and Winterglass Ice Blade. So the Winterglass and the Enchantments both together can cast 3. If they cast the Force, it's gonna despawn. So the first one is gonna despawn. So these limits are different from each other. That's why it's important you keep self-casting your Ice Blades, because you wanna have those 3 self-cast Ice Blades up all the time. And then the second enchantment is Frozen Orb. There's pretty much no debate. You have to use this. It's gonna give you like so much more damage. Like, it doesn't proc the conjuration stuff, and it doesn't proc the Winterglass, but still this gives you so much more damage, and it procs off the casts which are done by the conjurations and stuff like that. It procs the extra frozen orbs from your weapon, so it's just a very, very strong enchantment. So side note, if you're still pushing, like if you want to like just clear tier 80s like you see in the footage or whatever, go for Firebolt. Firebolt enchantment's the fastest pushing, so if you don't need extended Flameshield duration in the boss. If you're just farming, switch Ice Blades enchantment to Firebolt enchantment. It's gonna make your life so much easier farming. You're gonna get through the dungeon like way, way faster with that. So before we talk about the items, let's talk about breakpoints. Because this build requires you to hit certain breakpoints. If you don't hit those breakpoints, you're not going to have the perma flame shield, and you're going to have a very sad time playing this build. So here's the breakpoints which are important. Mana regeneration, you should be around 20. This is important. Mana generation, you should be above like 33, 34, somewhere around that. Mana cost reduction, 21 is pretty good. You can get a little bit lower. It really, I would say, aim for like 20. And then cooldown reduction. 45% is a good breakpoint. You can even get a little more. My 43% is not optimal, but I really have no very good, like I have not a single greater FX cooldown reduction. I have not hit crits on my focus. So my gear is not optimized, you will see in the next section. But you should aim for 45% cooldown reduction here. And then last breakpoint would be crit, which is technically not a breakpoint. So crit would be just, you want to get as much crit as possible. So I have 68.7% crit with 565 critical strike damage. So you want to get high critical strike damage so the crits work. And same with vulnerable damage. Mine is very low. Try to get as much vulnerable damage as possible. Temper those vulnerable damage on your items, right? Don't use damage to close. Don't use cold damage. Don't use whatever damage. Basically, every vulnerable damage you can temper is going to be multiplied by 50%. So if you temper 60% vulnerable damage, that's going to mean 90% additive damage, which is going to be the strongest stat you can see. If you can, for example, compare to the 33% damage, this is already upgraded ring, so vulnerable damage would be sitting at 130 or something like that after the 50% multiplier. So vulnerable damage is really your strongest additive stat here. And then obviously the attack speed, I already talked about 63%, right? So I have 48.4%. And if I eat the elixir of advantage here, I'm going to go to 63.3%. 63% is your breakpoint for the 20 frames attack here. Then for your flame shield, you want to basically reach 5 seconds duration. So that is like roughly the way you want to go. And you can get that by either having good tempers, like I have this one here, which is, obviously max roll, and I have this one which is close to max roll, so these are pretty good. And I hit this twice and I hit this once, but this is not fully upgraded. So I assume, you gotta hit this at least 3 times or 4 times depending on your roll. So really you need a good amount of flame shield duration. So I have like, what is this, 52%. So, aim for 50% plus flame shield duration, really. That's what it's gonna make it work. And if you put 1 armor roll on your gear, you're still gonna be at armor cap just fine here. So that is just what I wanna quickly talk about the breakpoints. And now next section, let's go about the gear here. All right, so let's go over the gear. So you want to have Shaco. You want to hit as many cooldown reduction as possible. Cooldown reduction and resource generation are both a good hit. Max life and all stats is not a good hit, right? So again, you want to reach like 45% cooldown reduction. So maybe it's best if you just hit it twice. And then for our chess piece, you want to get intelligence, mana per second. Mana per second is a very important roll. Don't skip this roll. You're going to run out of mana unless you're playing Starless Skies. And then you want to have +4 to Flame Shield, basically, or +3 to Flame Shield. I have a greater FX defensive skill, which, comes down to +5. But, Flame Shield is the best roll on here. But if you have a good defensive skills, rolls, it just also works just fine. So as you can see, it's already at +5. It's not going to go to +6, I assume. And you want to have Flame Shield duration at the highest possible roll, and you want to hit it at least once, better twice. So perfectly, you would hit it Flame Shield duration twice on both of your armor pieces with a very high roll. It's not so hard to actually temper Flame Shield duration with the high roll because there's only 3 different ones. So like theoretically, you get 2 Flame Shield hits every item before it bricks. So it's actually not so hard, I guess, to get a decent roll of Flame Shield duration here. And then you want to have lucky hit chance to just do a random stun or whatever effect to stagger the bosses faster. And you want to play the Aspect of Fortune just to get some extra frozen orb cast basically of your ice blades here. And we really don't need any other aspect aspect. In very high tier pushing, we might want to change this to Exploiter aspect, so we have more damage during the dungeon phase. But right now, I don't need that yet. But that's might change like a little bit later. And then we want to have gauntlets with attack speed, intelligence ranks to Frozen Orb, and you want to temper vulnerable damage. So you always want to temper vulnerable damage, the strongest temper you can get, since vulnerable damage basically gets multiplied with 50% multiplier, while other normal damages do not get multiplied at all. And you want to, again, crit this attack speed once, and you want to have 1 greater FX attack speed. This is pretty much required if you want to reach this attack speed breakpoint. And then again, just 1 random crowd control temper. And we play Inner Calm. This is going to give us 30% extra boss damage while we're standing still. And then for our pants, you want to have intelligence. Maximum life is not really required. Technically, you could get anything else, but I don't even know what you would want to get on pants, honestly. And you want to have 1 armor roll, so you still want to hit armor cap, because otherwise you're going to just die to random stuff way too soon. And again, Flameshield duration with a high roll, and hit it at least once or twice, depending on, you know, how often you hit the other Flameshield duration. And again, another crowd control on lucky hit. And we play the aspect of concussive strikes, which is going to give us more damage on stagger bosses. Then you play Asus Boots. Asus Boots, most important is the crit chance and the mana cost reduction and the critical strike damage. Movement speed and movement speed after killing elites doesn't really matter. The conjurations are going to give us the maximum movement speed anyway through conjuration mastery. So for Wand and Focus, there's 2 different setups you can play. The first setup you can play is on your Wand, you want to get chance for Frozen Orb projectiles to cast twice and hit it at least twice with a high roll, so my roll is pretty low. And then you want to get critical strike damage, you want to temper vulnerable damage, and you want to get intelligence and maximum life, or you can get the flat damage, which is going to be fairly weak. So you can still get the maximum life, so at least you can survive some kind of hits, and you want to get the conceded aspect. And then on your focus, again, the same story, chance for Frozen Orb, hit it at least twice. I hit it 3 times, but I have a low roll, so it's actually pre-wasted. And you want to hit probably greater FX cooldown reduction here. Greater FX crit chance is nice, but you want to have the aspect of Frozen Orbit as well. So this is the bad setup. This setup I have here is bad, because my focus, I basically have the Frozen Orb projectiles to cast twice, and that is eating up my masterworking crits. So ideally, you want to cast, you want to put the shadow damage or poison damage from the elemental surge temper on here, and then you can hit the masterworking on your cooldown reduction or your crit chance. And then, you know, because it's going to be 15% extra damage, and I just assume it's going to be better, or at least, you know, the same range than another Frozen Orb double cast. So you have to temper around with this, obviously. Like, my setup works as well, but I would recommend to get the Forced Tarasha stack from your focus and then try to, you know, get more cooldown reduction, because it's going to make it much easier for you to reach the breakpoints. And then obviously you want to have Fractured Winterglass, so you gotta hit Conjuration Mastery once, and the other stuff is ideally going to cooldown reduction. And you want to have a high, like the first stat where 43%, that should be as high as possible. The lucky hit doesn't matter all that much. And then for one of our rings, I want to get Intelligence, Attack Speed, Crit Chance. And again, instead of damage, you want to have vulnerable damage. And I'm still using Resource Cost Reduction. I guess ideally, you could use Unstable Currents cooldown reduction here. I think it would be better. I don't think I need the Resource Cost Reduction at this point. I still have to play around with this. You have to see if you're running out of resources or not. And if not, technically, you know, Resource Cost, the Unstable Currents cooldown reduction would be the best, and you can just take a random ring, like, and test if you're running out of resources if you don't have this on here, and just test it with masterwork rings. It's gonna be just fine. And of course, we want to play the accelerating aspect here. And then last is our Tarasha ring. So we play the ring here because we just want to have more damage, and since we discovered that Conceited aspect and that Stormswell aspect and Shredding Blades are not working anymore, we can basically freely use Tarasha for more damage. And also, very importantly, we have the cooldown reduction on here, which is mandatory for this build, so it's very, very important to reach the cooldown reduction breakpoints. That's why you want to, you know, crit cooldown reduction on this ring as much as possible. Resource generation is as well a very good stat on this ring. All right, let's go through the Paragon. So this is an 8 glyph Paragon, so this is really the maximum glass cannon you can build here, right? So we're going to start with Flame Feeder, and Flame Feeder is just going to give us 10% extra damage and some additives, and then we move over to the next board, which is going to be the Enchantment Master. We pick up the non-fizz nodes here, and we're just going to slot in our Elementalist here with 45 int. 40 would be perfect, so I might want to change this somehow, but I cannot find a better way, which actually you could remove these 2 nodes for this and you would have only 40 and you would save 1 node, but also you would remove the 8.89 non-physical damage. So this is not absolutely perfect, but you know, it's still good enough for this. And then next board is going to be Burning Instinct. We just pick the Tactician here. It gives us damage reduction and it gives us extra burning damage. So the damage reduction is still, you know, a little bit of damage reduction is still better than no damage reduction, but mainly we need our Tactician anyway for the 10% extra damage. And then next board is going to be the Elemental Summoner. We're just going to pick our Conjurer here. We need Conjurer for the Conjuration duration. It's an absolute requirement. We just pick it with 40 int here. The Conjuration damage doesn't matter all that much. Yet we're still going to pick the Elemental Summoner node because, you know, it doesn't matter all this much, but this is just 2 points basically. And the Ice Blade swipe for like 200 to 300k, so it's not terrible at all. And this is basically just 2 nodes, right? So I would call this free damage. And then we get the attack speed here. So getting the attack speed is important to get your attack speed breakpoint at 63% attack speed, okay? So the breakpoint is 63% attack speed, and then another 50 comes from the accelerating aspect and unstable currents. So 63 is your breakpoint. 63 is gonna be 20 frames. Below that, you're going to fall to 21 frames. The highest breakpoint you can reach is 18 frames. You can only reach that with Asus Ferocity, and that is going to require you to have 88.2% attack speed. So 88.2 you cannot reach with playing Tarasha Ring, only if you play Asus Ferocity. But I'm not going to continue this. Just remember this breakpoints. 63% attack speed, 20 frames. 78.2% attack speed, 19 frames. 88.2% attack speed, 18 frames. Okay, so then let's move over to the next board. That is going to be Frigid Fate. So we're going to pick this for the Enchanter Glyph here. There's an option to put this to charged, but I couldn't figure out a comfortable way yet of generating the crackling energy. So charged would be a 15% extra damage if you put it in here. So compared to the 80% additive, that would probably be somewhere around 7 to 8% extra damage. But again, you have to generate crackling energy, which is a little bit of breaking my flow, I would just say there. And then we're still going to pick Frigid Fate. So again, I made like a bunch of videos about Frigid Fate, Icefall, Storm Swirl aspect of Shredding Blades, all not working. Well, they are working, but not as intended. So what all these things do, including Frigid Fate, this is not going to be multiplying your entire damage with 30%. This is just going to multiply your vulnerable damage with 30%. So you want to build vulnerable damage from your tempers so you can get the most use of Frigid Fate. It's not going to be like you saw it before. You're just going to pick it. It's going to be 30% extra damage. It's not like this. This is requiring you to have a lot of vulnerable damage. It is relatively cheap to get this glyph, and it gives you like, in my current setup, it gives me like 80 to 90% additive damage, basically what it comes down to. But if you temper vulnerable damage on everywhere, you can probably get like somewhere around 200% additive damage out of Frigid Fate. So can definitely optimize around this. So I still recommend picking this, and I still recommend getting vulnerable damage on your gear there. And already said, I have the Enchanter here, and then next board is going to be Ceaseless Conduit. We just picked this for the Destruction. We picked the Destruction with max dexterity for the maximum critical strike damage. The same goes for critical strike. What I just said for vulnerable also goes for critical strike. So if you do a critical strike, it's not going to multiply your damage with 50%. It is going to multiply only your critical strike damage with 50%. So that's why you want to get as much critical strike damage as possible to get the most out of this multiplier. If you have no critical strike damage and you deal a critical strike, you're basically just going to do like 5 to 10% extra damage. Since we're using Devouring Blaze, which is going to be another 21%, we have a 71% multiplier on Critical Strike. So Critical Strike damage is the absolute best additive damage stat you can get. You can unfortunately only get it on your wand or through like bugged Rogue Tempers. I don't know if that's still working, but in general, Critical Strike damage is very, very strong. And then next board is going to be Searing Heat. We basically just picked the Glyph socket here and put in Control. Control is not great on bosses, but I'm simply running out of glyphs to use. I have not a very good glyph setup for like anything. The other one you could use is Winter, but Winter also doesn't work on bosses. So I'm still using Control here, and at least it's going to give me some extra damage during the stagger phases. And then we picked this Critical Strike damage here. So this is 22.5 critical strike damage. Again, that multiplied by 70%, so this is like a 40% additive. So critical strike damage, highly recommend getting that. And then we're going to do one last board, which is going to be the Static Search. And we're just going to pick the Exploit glyph here with just some random damage nodes. So the board works out perfectly in the end. We can get every single bonus we want just fine here.